Alright, so in this video we're just going to expand upon what we were almost literally expand upon what we were talking about in the previous video. The previous video being the video entitled How Our Reality is Built, Reality Formation Creation. And so what we're going to do in this video is add the consciousness component to it. That is the positive and negative expression of consciousness that flows through this methodology, and it's something that we also have to be aware of as well. And so, for a refresher about how our reality is built, our reality is created by having access to available information for the individual, and the individual's ability to process or understand that available information. And once the available information is inputted and processed by the individual, a manifested result can be created. The manifested result, whether manifested order or manifested chaos, is dependent upon the quality of available information, the individual's ability to process or understand the available information, and the individual executing or acting in the real world based upon that processed information. That's the deterministic process for how our reality is built, and it's how all manifestations must occur in the real world. And so, there's a second component that we also have to be aware of that we're going to talk about in this video, and it is a component that interacts with this very deterministic process, and that is what I call conscious free will. But I won't be using that term very much because it's a very misleading term. But the point is that this process of reality formation creation, if it were determined completely, then it would work 100% of the time. But it doesn't work 100% of the time. And that's because there's humans that are interacting with this process. And so before humans, there was the word. In the beginning, there was the word. There was the logos. Everything was logical and orderly. Everything was ordered and logical. And then humans showed up and kind of messed everything up a little bit. Because humans have this incredible binary option of selecting how to express their consciousness. We can choose to expand our consciousness, and we could also choose to contract our consciousness. And this is a topic, this binary choice between expanding consciousness or contracting consciousness is an extremely important thing that we're going to be talking about a whole lot, because it is a question of perspective. It's how you choose to perceive reality itself. And so we're going to talk about that a lot. And so let's just start here from the perspective of the individual, where consciousness is it's constantly expanding or contracting based upon this generative polarity, the generative polarity of the individual choosing either the positive force for consciousness or that expands our consciousness, or choosing the negative force for consciousness that contracts our consciousness. And so this is really the start of the process, and it's known as the generative polarity. The choice is this generative polarity, and that's all that we're going to talk about in terms of this choice in this video. But like I said, we're going to talk about this choice a whole lot because it determines a whole lot of things. And really, this generative polarity is the only true choice that we have as conscious beings. The generative polarity is the force that we use to create the quality of our experience here on Earth, and is the essence of our creative faculties. And what we're talking about here is the difference between doing something with care, doing something with love, enjoying it, living in the present moment as you're creating your thing, or not caring about what you're creating, half-assing it, going through the motions, wondering why you're doing this, as opposed to just doing it. Okay? And so, this is really the biggest difference between a successful individual and an unsuccessful individual, because you should consider caring and paying attention to what you want to create, because that's what will offer you the highest probability of generating an orderly, positive, good quality manifestation in your life. And so, there are no shortcuts to this. You have to have care and love and to fall in love with the process of reality formation creation, because that will allow you to properly execute or do the things that you have to do in order to create the life that you want to live for yourself. And so, what we're focusing on now is the process by which this consciousness interacts with this determined process. And we will do that, and then we'll discuss this choice in greater detail, like I said, in later videos, because it plays a major role in human success and achievement. But first, we have to understand the process. So this is the process from beginning to end. The positive expression of the generative polarity is what we call love. Love is consciousness expanding or growing our awareness. It's becoming more aware of the world around you. And so what more aware of the world around you means is that you're transforming more random data structures into information that you can use to improve your life here on Earth. And so that's the positive expression of this polarity, of this generative polarity. And if there's a positive expression, then there's a negative expression. And the negative expression of the generative polarity is what we call fear. Fear is consciousness contracting or shrinking your awareness. It's becoming less aware of the world around you. And so we have this thing, it's called attention, awareness, consciousness. If consciousness is experience, and if you and you experience life as if you love it, then your consciousness will have a much higher chance of growing, as it allows you to enjoy the process of accessing, processing, and then outputting the information that you come across. And so, Sam Harris says that consciousness is the only intelligible domain of value, that consciousness is the basis of human values. Value is the worth of something. What we value is what we pay attention to, because what we value is what we deem to be worth our investment of time and attention to that thing. Okay, so time and attention are the only things that you can actually invest into something. They're the only true currencies that exist in our reality, time and attention. And that's why we spend our time on things, and that's why we pay attention to things, because you're investing the only two true currencies that you have at your disposal. And trust me, that's more than enough to get what you want out of life, time and attention. And understand that this is a two-way street. This value proposition is a two-way street, because through our conscious thoughts, our emotions and actions, through the three aspects of consciousness, we imbue meaning into the things that we choose to value. We choose to value based upon what we pay attention to. And we create the value and the meaning by the amount of time and energy and effort that we put into doing that thing. And so the expression of love, which is an emotion is an aspect of consciousness, a very misunderstood aspect of consciousness that we're going to talk about a whole lot. And so we're going to start with love, which is an emotion that tells us what we ought to pay attention to, because that thing is something of value. It's something that we value. It's something that's worthwhile. It's also something that we can't get enough of, which is why it often gets used to express love for another. And so, you look at things that you love. So just think of a person that you love. So for me, I'm a man attracted to women. If I loved a woman romantically, I would want to spend a lot of time with her. I would love to invest a lot of attention to her, because I enjoy her presence. I enjoy her being around me. And so I want to give her all of these investments to her, because she's producing value for me. She's making me happy. She's making life enjoyable and worth living. You see, worth living, enjoyable, invested, attention, awareness, consciousness. And so, but we have to understand that love is more than just romantic or familial love. It doesn't depend on anyone other than yourself. It doesn't depend on anyone other than yourself, the present moment, and how you perceive the experiences that you're having. And so, love should be seen as the expansive force for consciousness, because the feeling of love allows us to expand our consciousness by getting us to pay attention, which allows us to become open to truth, open to knowledge, and allows us to gain deeper meaning and understanding in order for us to acquire more of what we value, of what we want to pay attention to. And so, love is a willingness to learn and a wanting urge to know and have more of what we love. And this just means that we're becoming more aware of the thing that we are putting our love into. And that's really what raising your consciousness means. When you hear people talking about expanding consciousness or raising your consciousness, it just means that you're putting love, care, attention, time into something. And so, that's the positive expression of this generative polarity. The negative expression of the generative polarity is fear. Fear is the opposite of love. And remember, these are polarities, so remember the principle of polarity. Remember that you have these two opposite things, but really at the end of the day, they're just one and the same. So fear does the exact same thing that love does. It is the exact same, it is an emotional response that gets us to pay attention to something. And so, just for an example, let's say you're walking in the woods and you hear the very terrifying growl of a bear, a grizzly bear, that sounds like it's just like 20 feet away from you. You hear that growl, and then your blood like literally curdles. It's a horrifying feeling. And all that feeling and experience is trying to tell you is there's something over there that you need to pay attention to immediately. And that's what fear does for us. And so we can't look at fear as a negative thing because it's necessary. And we're going to talk about it a whole lot on this channel because we have to come to understand fear just as much as we have to come to understand love. We can't hide away from any emotion just because they're perceived as positive or negative, because if you put yourself in a different situation, that emotion suddenly becomes very important. And if there's a bear 20 feet away from you, fear is a good emotion to have because fear does things for us. And so what it does is that at the end of the day, it shuts down our ability to actually expand our consciousness, because fear shuts down any higher order functions, or as many higher order functions as it can, to divert energy into the parts of your body that you need for survival. And this is survival in the very, very short term. And so one of the first higher order functions to go is our connection to this, to consciousness itself. And so let's look at fear as a great evolutionary development when we live in a society or in an existence where there exists times in our lives when there will be imminent danger in existence nearby us, very close to us. And so when you're fighting or running away from immediate danger, you don't need to think. You don't even actually want to think. You don't want to process a darn thing because that'll take time. Precious seconds, time, wondering, why is there a bear in my backyard? That is not a question that you need to answer when there's a bear 20 feet away from you. You need to do something else. You need to act. You need to move on instinct, on impulse very quickly, because you just need to survive. And again, thinking really just gets in the way of that moment, in the moment of battle, where the difference between life and death is measured in milliseconds, is measured in just very tiny amounts of time and very accurate precision. But the point is here, and that's important, and we're going to talk about those moments in time when things get serious, because we have to understand how to act or function when fear is coursing through our veins and adrenaline is pumping and all that stuff. We'll talk about the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system in later videos. But for this video, we have to understand that for the vast majority of our time within our society, there's nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear, and yet we still do experience fear. And fear still does what it does, okay? Fear does what it does. It contracts our consciousness. And it does that because, like I said, in the moment when you should feel fear, you don't need to think, but it shouldn't be doing this for things that don't cause us imminent danger. And it still does what it does, which is contract our consciousness. And that's what we're going to be talking about here within a society that is fairly safe and secure. And so, fear is the force that contracts consciousness. It's a force that puts consciousness into a smaller and smaller box and cuts it off from the individual, because fear is the basis for unconsciousness. Fear is what shuts consciousness down. Fear is an unwillingness to, in our society, in an existence where 99.9% of the time you're in a safe environment, you shouldn't allow fear to cause you to hide away from certain things. And this is what fear does as well, because it's cutting off our consciousness, it's cutting off our higher order functions. And so fear becomes an unwillingness to learn, either because you believe that you already know everything and therefore learning learning more would shatter your ego. We're going to talk about this in later videos, but the point is that gaining knowledge, which this knowledge being presented to you, is an unpleasant experience because you have an ego, you have a particular perspective, and knowledge may shatter your ego. It may put your ego into question. It may say that maybe you're not right about certain things. And if you associate yourself very closely with your thoughts and your belief structures and your perceptions, and you think that they're right and correct, it is a very uncomfortable and unpleasant feeling to gain knowledge and realize that you were wrong about a lot of things, that you were wrong about certain things, especially if you associate very closely to your thoughts, which you shouldn't do. And so there's this certain language that comes with fear. It sounds like this. It's like, I don't want to look at that, or that can't be true, or I don't want that to be true. I don't want that to be true. And the issue is that the fact of the matter is this: the truth hurts, okay? The truth hurts. And that pain can make us scared and fearful because we experience, when we gain knowledge, this feeling of this unpleasant feeling, and then we say, oh, I don't want that anymore. So then we associate fear with something that we should avoid. And that's not really what fear does, because remember, at the end of the day, love and fear are just emotions that allow us, that tell us what we should pay attention to. Okay? And so fear is your indicator telling you what you should pay attention to, because your survival may very well depend upon you paying attention to whatever that thing is. But if you don't go towards that fear, you actually end up stopping your ability to gain knowledge on the things that you need to pay attention to. And so let's just go over a couple of things that it hurts to know so that you can experience this feeling. You know, it hurts to know that human trafficking is occurring all across the world, even in civilized countries, all across North America. It hurts to know that, the actions of the U.S. government, my government, the country that I exist in, has caused the actions that they have done in Libya have actually caused so much destruction, so much chaos in that country that now there's actually open slave markets in that country. There's actually open slave markets. There are actually more slaves today than at any point in human history because of the actions of my government. That hurts to know. It hurts to know that everyone you know, everyone you love is going to die. It hurts to know that you're going to die. It also hurts to know that your current state of affairs is the result of your actions, and that your actions, the only actions that you're responsible for, and that if you want to live a life that you actually wish that you had, well, you're going to have to change your behavior, and that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of work and a lot of time and patience and energy, and that hurts to know as well. And so the point is that it takes courage to know things. And that makes sense because it takes a whole lot of courage to love. It takes a whole lot of courage to love things. And so our reality, we have to acknowledge, is a pretty scary place when you stop and you look at it objectively. It's a very unjust place. It's a place based upon where you were born. The fact that I was born in the United States of America and not in Afghanistan completely changes. And these are humans. I'm a human, and there's humans in Afghanistan, and the only difference between both of us is that I was born in the United States of America and they were born in Afghanistan, and that completely changes their experiences, their circumstances, and that seems kind of unfair. That seems kind of unjust. And there's all sorts of unfairness in our reality. There's all sorts of unjust actions. There are all sorts of terrible things that happen to some of the most innocent people in our society, to our children, and that those things happen to people is horrible. And it's always done. It almost appears like there's no order to it. And so we exist in that sort of reality where all of that craziness does exist, and we can't pretend that it doesn't exist, because it does. And so that means that our reality is a scary place, and that means that it takes courage to come to know a reality that's this terrifying. It takes courage to know it, and it takes even more courage to talk about it, to speak about it. And so, mad respect for those people who do that. And so, where am I on this? So, generative polarity tells us what we should pay attention to, and the individual decides whether to expand their consciousness to process and incorporate what we should pay attention to into their being, into their actions, or to contract their consciousness to ignore, to cower, and hide themselves away from what they should pay attention to. And so, if it's expanding with love, then you move through into the first phase of the methodology of how our reality is built. You begin accessing available information. You begin to look into things. You utilize this willingness to learn, this willingness to invest into certain things, and into coming to know things. Love opens us up and allows us to receive truth. And so you gotta want it. You gotta need it, because you may not like learning what you have to learn as you go through this process. And so Nietzsche said that the measure of a man's value is based upon how much truth a man can bear, because the truth hurts. But it's worth it, because knowledge positively influences the quality of our lives, because it positively influences our decision-making processes that lead to understanding and success in every area of our lives. And so if you want good to manifest, then you need the knowledge on how to make it good. You're not getting out of your current situation without learning. Knowledge is power. Learning is always the key. It's always the answer. However, if you choose the generative polarity of fear, the opposite of knowledge manifests itself. The opposite of knowledge is ignorance. 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 Ignore. To ignore knowledge. To willfully refuse or disregard information. Ignorance is the refusal of the very knowledge that we need in order to manifest order in our lives. And so, if the measure of a man's value is based on how much truth he can bear, then it follows that willful ignorance in the presence of knowledge is the measure of a bad person, because ignorance negatively influences the quality of our lives, because it negatively influences our decision-making processes in every area of our lives. And so, if you're ignorant about how something works, then you can't create that thing. From something as simple as making a cup of coffee, if you don't know how to make a cup of coffee, then you're not going to make a cup of coffee. You're not going to get a cup of coffee. If you don't know how to start a business, then you're not going to start a business, let alone run a successful business. And so remember, all of the knowledge is online. You can learn how to make a cup of coffee by asking the internet how to make a cup of coffee. And likewise, you can find courses online on how to start a business. So it's all online there. And so if you have knowledge enough to find these videos, then you have knowledge enough to come to know pretty much everything that humanity can do. And so, really, the point is that there's no more excuses. If you don't know something, then chances are, and if you don't know something and you have access to the internet, which nearly all of us do now, then you are willfully ignoring knowledge of what you need to know in order to be successful, because it is out there. So, moving on to the information processing phase, which this information processing phase, it sounds like it's something that occurs within the mind, but it actually occurs internally, both internally and externally at the same time. Because remember, we have to remind ourselves, as above, so below, as within, so without. This processing within the mind is occurring within the individual and also occurring outside of the individual at the societal or collective level as well. And so we're going to separate these two, the inner world and the outer world, simply for ease of being able to speak about it. So starting with the inner world, what's happening inside of the individual, if the positive expression of love is chosen and we become open to truth and begin inputting knowledge, then we begin to process the knowledge. And then what occurs internally brings us understanding. It brings us understanding. When we come to understand the knowledge that we're taking in, we start to become what is known as a sovereign being, sovereign individual. Understanding allows us to gain sovereignty over ourselves. Broken down, the word sovereignty means, broken down you have the word sover, and then you have reign. And so first the word sover, it just means above or over, because if you remove the S, you literally get the word over. And then the second part, reign, that literally just means one who is rulership, the person who's in control. It's like a king. King is sovereign over his subjects. And so when you put the words together, sovereign means one who is above rulership or one who is in control. And so a sovereign being is a being that has control over him or herself. And so as a state of consciousness, sovereignty means that one has unified the three aspects of their consciousness such that there is no contradiction between one's thoughts, emotions, and actions. As we think, so we feel, so we behave. You're in control of the thoughts that you give attention to. You're in control of your emotions, and if you're in control of your thoughts and emotions, then you're in control of your behavior and actions in the physical world. Sovereignty is true self-discipline, self-control, self-love, and self-mastery. It's bringing yourself, your being, into non-duality and ultimately allows for you to be the master over your own fate. More on this in section 2, because this is the goal of every individual, to become sovereign, to come to know and understand as many things as they need to know in order to live a successful life. And so further, it also means that you're not subject to the whims of others, because you can think for yourself, and therefore no one owns you. In fact, you have a very deep understanding of what ownership is, and that makes you subject to no one but yourself. And the negative internal expression is the result of ignorance, which is confusion. Confusion is the state of mind in which an individual is ruled by fear and ignorance. When you're in fear, you ignore or refuse knowledge, and that obviously leads to confusion because you're ignoring the very knowledge that you need in order to understand what the heck is going on out there. And so, this is internal anarchy, as there's an absence of a ruler or master within. There's no self-control, there's no self-discipline, no self-love, and certainly no self-mastery. So confusion should be seen as internal opposition, or being torn apart from within, such that one's thoughts, emotions, and actions are in perpetual contradiction to each other. There is no unity of mind, okay? And this means that when individuals are not in control of themselves, when they are confused and scared and are ignoring the very answers that they need to solve their problems, they actually end up starting the process of looking for control from a perceived higher authority, from somebody who they perceive to know better than them and who looks like they can help them perhaps. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about the external expression of love that simultaneously expresses itself with the internal expression, but does so perceptually outside of the inner world of the individual. And this occurs at the cultural or societal level, or the collective level at large. And so, the first thing that we have to understand is that just because we're separate individual units, that doesn't mean that we don't have an effect on the society at large, on the society that we exist within. And so the point is that we all affect our society at the collective level. If you exist in a society, you are an individual that comprises the whole of society. You are a part of the society, and we all play. And so the point is that we all play a role in the happiness and success, or depression and failure of the culture with which we are in. We all play a role in this, okay? Not just politicians, not just celebrities, not just influencers. Every single individual unit plays a role within the society at the collective level. And so, if we have a whole group of people expressing the polarity of love, becoming open to truth and knowledge and understanding, and becoming sovereign individuals and expanding their consciousness within themselves, then what expresses itself or what manifests itself in that society is freedom for all. True freedom for all is a big deal because it should be seen as the goal for all human development. It should be the goal for spiritual, financial, familial, individual, any form of success. The end goal should be true freedom for all. And such a state can only manifest itself as a result of our society's adherence to natural law. And we're going to talk about that more later on. So, freedom is expressed externally, not internally, because freedom has nothing to do with the individual. Freedom is a collective ideal. It's not my freedom or your freedom or you have more freedoms than me, because that's not freedom. Freedom is equal for every single individual, or it's not freedom at all. And so, if we say that we want to be free, then the only way that freedom can manifest itself is when the positive generative polarity is being expressed by the majority of society's individual units. And it can't manifest itself by any other means. And so if we say that we want to be free, then this is the only path that we can take. And it's a collective journey that actually occurs at the individual level, because every single individual needs to go on the journey, go down the path, take the path of becoming of the positive expression of love, to become open to truth, to become open to the knowledge that they need to be successful in their lives. And then when they do that, over time, they become sovereign individuals that don't need rulers, because they understand that they have to act within the bounds of natural law. And so they don't really need external control. And so, as foreshadowed here, the negative expression is control, or the rise of authoritarianism. External control is the pathway to all forms of evil and destruction, because external control is the enforcement of a strict adherence to authority, always, always, always at the expense of our collective freedoms. And so authoritarians, what they do is they offer solutions to those who are confused. All of their solutions always limit the freedoms of all people under their control in the exchange for the illusion of safety, in exchange for power for themselves. And so what they claim is that they are the ones who can stop the confusion, who can lead the shepherds to the promised land or whatever. And so what they're trying to say is that they can stop the confusion for the individual. They can stop the chaos, when in actuality, they are actually the manifestation of the chaos itself. They are the manifestation of the chaos, because they are the harbingers. They're the bringers of the chaos. And so this results when a society lives in direct opposition to natural law. This is a society that lives in depravity and no longer believes in morality. They don't believe that there's good and evil. They don't believe that there's right and wrong. They believe that they can make these decisions, these choices for themselves, and you just have to listen to them because they know better than you. And that sounds like our politicians today, and it's very unsettling. And so the point of saying that, is that such a society that exists in a state of depravity, in a state of ignoring the true objective knowledge between right and wrong, those sort of societies, they don't survive for very long. And so, from these two diverging expressions of consciousness, love and fear, we get a manifested result that we create. The manifested result can only be one of two things. We talked about this. The one of two things that it can be is order or chaos. And I just want to point out that this is what Dr. Jordan Peterson's always talking about when he's talking about order and chaos. He wrote that book, 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, because rules are order. The only antidote to chaos is order, and rules just mean order. They mean conditions. They mean necessities, things that you have to follow in order for order to manifest itself. And so, order occurs when we act in harmony with natural law. Order is manifested good. Good just means right, correct, valid, and true. We're going to talk a lot about good in later videos, but I'm just giving you an introduction to that term here. And so manifested good can only manifest from expanding consciousness, from love, which allows us to become open to truth, which allows us to gain understanding, which allows us to gain self-mastery and sovereignty over ourselves, which allows for freedom to prosper for all. Order only results when there is balance or justice, which can only be present when the society has accepted truth and justice as the leading form of practice. So these are the requirements to get the things that we say that we want for ourselves, our families, our society, and for the world. Sovereignty for the individual, we're going to talk about that, and freedom for the collective, and we'll be talking about that as well. So the opposite of order is chaos. Chaos occurs when we act in opposition to natural law. Chaos is manifested evil. Evil just means wrong, invalid, incorrect, and false. So if I say 2 + 2 = 5, that is evil because it's wrong. That's all that evil means, okay? Manifested evil manifests from contracting consciousness, from fear, which causes us to ignore the truth, which confuses us, which then allows for external control to prosper, because those who do know the way to persuade people, to manipulate people, can easily manipulate people who are living in a state of confusion and ignorance, because they're ignoring the very knowledge that they need in order to stop people from manipulating them, okay? And so, Chaos only results when there is imbalance or injustice in our society, which can only be present when the truth has been ignored or when people pretend that the truth does not exist. And so chaos is the manifestation of exactly the opposite of what we want, of what we say that we want out of our lives, okay? And so from here, I'm just going to let you know what we're going to talk about in the next video, because I made chaos sound pretty bad, huh? Well, as it turns out, order needs chaos to manifest itself. And so order needs chaos, and that means that they're polarities, and so they're opposites of the exact same thing, which means that we need to experience chaos in order to create order. We need the chaos to drag the order out of the chaos. And so I'm going to discuss chaos in the next video, because chaos cannot be something that we fear, because fear is the contracting force for consciousness. So we have to come to know and understand chaos itself. And the point is that you can't have true freedom without the possibility of chaos. So really, we have to learn to love chaos, because it's how we actually learn and how we actually grow and prosper. We prosper from the chaos of the unknown. And the point is that, again, as the principle of polarity states, the polar opposites of order and chaos actually need each other, and therefore chaos is necessary. And so we'll talk about that more in the next video. And from here, I just want to leave you with the idea of these forces of pleasure and pain, love and fear, good and evil, order and chaos. These are forces that exist in our realm, and we have to be aware of them. And they're all just forces that are expressed by the expanding and contracting force of consciousness, and the individual can experience these at the individual level and come to know them and understand them and utilize them for success in their lives if you do take the time to gain knowledge of them. And that's what we're going to do for the foreseeable future, and for my experience here on Earth, because this is what I love to talk about. So that's what we're going to do. And so I'll see you in the next video.